Comment. Ken?
If we could, I don't know how everybody else feels, but as far as like the animal ordinance, or I know we're moving to the liquor, maybe we could have those set at the podium, the most current, up to date. So, because we've ran into it twice where we've had people go, well, I don't have the most current, and Mr. Walsh has been willing to offer his each time, but I think if we had it up there, so when we're referencing, they can see exactly what we see. And same thing with the liquor ordinance, because I think it's gonna possibly turn out to be the exact same thing. They're gonna have maybe not the most current one. So I think that would help a little bit if we did that.
Just have the packet
They,
up there.
just
You
the
can scroll
ordinance,
through.
right.
Is that something we can do?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, we certainly can have hard copies in place so that people can have a version, is that what you're saying?
Just one at the
Right at the
podium,
podium.
right, so, you know, we got the
Oh, I see
dog
what you're
one,
saying.
just the
not,
ordinance.
Not on the screen so much, but
Right,
just.
just at the podium, so like if we say,
Oh,
you
okay.
know, line 169, they can, and then they can leave it for the next person that's gonna get up and say whatever, so. That's just my thought, because I think they'd have the most current, there at the podium, so, you know, when they're referencing, we're all referencing the exact same one, and we're not being misconstrued, so,
Everybody
just an
okay?
idea.
Everybody okay with that?
The only thing, you know, the way that it's currently, the current version, like for instance with that, because there was a current version, but then what we had was a motion to amend, you know, proposal to amend that. And so, you know, what I would suggest is that you kind of use some judgment that, well, okay, here's the current version, and here's the what we anticipate might be a motion to amend, so that it's clear, because I think it's really, we really need to be clear that, that you know, nothing happens until it happens in there in an open meeting. And if you, like with that, if that proposal had been redrafted, rewritten, and was stamped sitting there in front of them in the form that it would be if the amendment is adopted, that might be kind of deceptive to people, number one, but also it might imply, you know, a lot more of that the decision's already been made when it really hasn't.
Done deal.
And I don't know if I explained that real well, but I think that you're getting what I'm talking about, but I think it would be a good idea to have those things there so people can see, you know, when.
But you were just reading from the one that was in the packet.
Yeah, I think Ken's got a good idea. That way we can reference whatever the current one is. If we've got an amendment, we can add a sheet just like John made me that shows what it would read and not have that included in there. But
The amendment doesn't really exist until.
it doesn't
it's
exist
passed.
until it's
Right.
final, yeah.
Right.
Thanks. I know that there was a couple mentions, one from a couple people, about not being able to access the ordinance or not being able to find it. I know that sometimes it's, I'm not sure what that was about, but it seemed to be fairly accessible. Am I correct in that, Carter?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, the ordinance that you have will always be on the website, because we make the packets available every single time on the website. I double checked the next day, and indeed, the version that was on the website outside of the packet was the same one that you have too. So, I'm not sure what that means. Oftentimes, what it means is they were given one by somebody else, instead of getting one from us or looking at the website or whatever, and so.
I just wanted to make that clarification that we do have that.
Absolutely.
If anybody is making that claim that it's not on there and they're not being able to find it, that we have it accessible.
Yeah, I think the one we had was somebody says, well, I don't do websites. So, I'm not sure we can help that if they don't do email.
I like the idea though. Why not just have a hard copy up there so that we can.
Let's do that.
We can do that.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Anything else we need to replay from last Tuesday? Obviously, be talking about the liquor license again, so no changes. Anything public comment that we need to pay attention to? No? Okay. All right, that was quick. Cedar Springs Wind Energy Project Overview.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we were hoping we could get just basically a status, if you will, on the project that is happening in our area. And we have a consultant here with us that's helping us and the project move forward. So if we could turn some time over to our guest. I didn't catch your name. I apologize for that.
Ryan Fitzpatrick. I think that.
I was going to introduce.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you, Liz. I
Thanks.
appreciate that.
Mayor, members of council, in November, there was a public meeting held in Douglas and with the Converse County Commission as well as with the consultant for the Cedar Springs project. So I went over for that evening, had a chance to meet the project director, Ryan, who you'll hear from in a few minutes. And the project, they had laid everything out, but it's very obvious that Natrona County is also going to be impacted with this wind energy project. So I had asked Ryan that evening if he would take the time to come up and introduce himself as project director to all of you, and also just kind of educate us as to what some of the potential impacts will be, both positive and negative, with this wind energy project. I also took the liberty to invite the other municipalities to join us. Kevin O'Hearn with the town of Mills is here tonight, also to hear from Ryan and be able to update his town council on what's going on. So we got Kevin, but we're going to turn it over to Ryan, and he'll introduce the project.
Mr. Mayor and members of the council, I appreciate you taking some time to hear about the project. I put together a little bit of a presentation here. You can just pass these out. I really appreciate accommodating my schedule. When I had to reschedule, I was scheduled to meet with you guys about a month ago, and something else got rescheduled. It was a hard commitment that I had to make, and I really appreciate your flexibility, being able to work with me on that. Thank you, Liz, for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here. As Liz said, my name is Ryan Fitzpatrick. I'm project director with NextEra Energy Resources. And to introduce the company first a little bit, NextEra Energy is a Florida-based company, Juno Beach, Florida. It's a Fortune 150 company. It's got two main subsidiaries. There's Florida Power and Light, which is one of the largest rate-regulated utilities in the country. And as far as megawatt hours served, it's the largest in the country. A lot of air conditioning in Florida. And then there's NextEra Energy Resources. That's who I work for. We're the development side of NextEra Energy, and we're the largest renewable development company in the world. We've got wind and solar and storage investments in 33 states in Canada. And actually, I think we're at 34 states in Canada now. Wyoming's not included yet. We don't have any operating wind assets in Wyoming yet. We did develop and build a project in Uinta County in 2003. Ended up through kind of a unique situation selling that project. But NextEra typically owns and operates all of its projects. Just to kind of lead off on NextEra also for some company values, we're committed to excellence. We do the right thing, and we treat people with respect. And we really do try to live by those values in our interactions with municipalities, with counties, with landowners, with any stakeholders involved in these projects every day in performing our work. I already gave you kind of some of the stats on NextEra and NextEra Energy and Florida Power and Light. We do also have some nuclear assets, natural gas development, pipeline development, and so it's not all renewables. We do have some fossil investments as well. As far as project overview, the Cedar Springs Wind Project, we also call it internally Cedar Springs 1 and 2 because the contract is another semi-unique contract for NextEra. We have it's a 400 megawatt development. 200 megawatts will be owned and operated by NextEra, and then the other 200 megawatts we're going to build and upon completion sell to Rocky Mountain Power or Pacificor. And so they will own and operate the project, the 200 megawatt project that we built for them. Between those two phases, what we're permitting, going through permitting right now with Converse County and the industrial siting division would be for 160 turbines, up to 160 turbines. It's about a $400 million investment, and it would require a 27-mile generation tie line, transmission line that would run from 2 project substations down to the Windstar substation near Dave Johnston, outside of Glen Rock. The project is going to consist, like I said, of about 160 wind turbines. We'd have 2 project substations, 2 operations and maintenance buildings, lots of roads, underground collection, some overhead transmission, and that's about it for the most part. The timeline on this is, right now, 2019 is our big permitting push. So we applied in late 2018 with Converse County for our wind energy conversion systems permit. We're going through the process with Converse County. We expect to have our permit approval in early April from Converse County. We're submitting our industrial siting permit a week from today, actually. And so then that information will be made public. We plan that will lead to an industrial siting council hearing in Douglas on May 16th and 17th of this year. And then we would plan to commence construction as early as August of this year. A lot of these timing, the construction period is going to last from, we say from August until December of 2020. And so we would reach commercial operations in December of 2020. So what we'd be doing basically throughout kind of the late fall and winter of this year would be a lot of road work, excavation of foundations, pouring foundations, and getting a lot of that work done. We'd start actually putting up the turbines next summer. And so, summer of 2020, I should say. And so that's kind of the general timeline of that. I think that where that particularly relates to the city of Casper and any of the municipalities around Natrona County that are part of the study area identified by the Industrial Siting Division is that you're eligible for unmitigated impact assistance funds that come from this portion of the sales tax that we'll be paying. It's a portion of the state portion of the sales tax that we'll be paying on this project. And so our industrial siting application will be going in, like I said, a week from today, and that's going to have a lot of information in there that can help drive a proposal for unmitigated impacts. And you have to, these aren't just doled out. You have to come up with a request to the Industrial Siting Council, and these requests ideally are due by the pre-council hearing, which is about 7 to 10 days before our industrial siting hearing. So, like I said, we're scheduled for May 16th and 17th. The 17th is actually when they deal with the business related to the allocation of unmitigated impact assistance funds. But when you're looking at unmitigated impact assistance, it's going to be whatever kind of a strain there is on public services that isn't necessarily something that would be mitigated through any other kind of tax collections. And so you identify what that's going to be. There's likely going to be, we have a housing plan that's going to be included in this industrial siting application. The industrial siting application takes into account the fact that there's a gigantic oil play going on right now in Converse County. And so you have to take into account the availability of hotel space in Douglas and Casper, and where all these workers are going to stay. We're projecting workforce over 250, peak workforce over 250 in July of 2020. So it's the average workforce, I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head right now, but it's right around 120 over the 15-month construction period that we're proposing. And so there's going to be a lot of people staying in Casper most likely for that, so that's a great benefit to the city of Casper. But there's also going to be potentially, as Liz indicated, some of the negative impacts could be some of the strains on public services, and that's where you start trying to quantify those and determine what you need to help with those unmitigated impacts. And so there's going to be a lot of data to base that on. This industrial siting application is a beast. I think it's about 700 pages last count. So there's a lot of data in there to sort through and be able to feed these requests for unmitigated impacts. And if the Industrial Siting Division has not met with you yet, I imagine they'll be requesting a meeting soon to discuss this very topic. And so I know that they had already met with Converse County about this topic. And so as part of the study area in the city of Casper and Natrona County, Town of Mills is part of that as well, part of the study area as well. So you can expect that to be coming. I'm going to move on to a little bit of landowner benefits. I know this doesn't relate necessarily to the city of Casper, but I think that this is just something that's just good information to put out there that, we're looking, this project should be paying about $60 million to the landowners involved in the project over the life of the project. It's compatible with agricultural operation. In fact, wind energy development is ideal with agricultural operation, and it leaves about 98% of the land still useful for grazing or farming. In this case, grazing, ranch land. It provides road improvements for the landowners a lot. It's just clean, homegrown, affordable energy. As far as community benefits go, the project's going to pay about $70 million in property and sales tax over the life of the project. The sales tax, of course, comes up front. It's about $50 million in generation taxes with our current tax law, which I would say we're happy that did not get increased this year again. But but about $50 million in generation taxes over the life of this project. I mentioned the construction jobs. This is going to create about 16 full-time, high-paying jobs. Every town I go to, they want all those employees to be living in their town, and so I don't know where they're going to live necessarily, but we have planned to employ about 16 full-time jobs for operations and maintenance for this position, or for this project. Of course, increased local business, and you're going to see a lot of that during the construction period, and it's helping America become more energy independent. So with that, if you guys have any questions for me, I'd be happy to try to answer them to the best of my ability.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of them. What's the capacity of the individual turbines? I'm getting like 2.5 megawatts at 100% efficiency. So,
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, yeah, it is. Right now, we're plotting 2.5 megawatt.
so
turbines.
the actual rated capacity is 2.5, and you get about a third of that.
It's better than a third of the. It's closer to half.
Okay.
Yeah. So the capacity factor, what you're looking at, you're asking a question about net capacity factor.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, net capacity factor, it's typically semi-proprietary, but what you're looking at for I would say competitive wind farm nowadays, especially in this area, you better be north of 45%.
Okay. And you mentioned you were tied into a couple of nukes. Are you with Georgia Power?
No, our nukes, we've got a nuke in Iowa, we've got one in Florida, I think we have one up in New England somewhere as well.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Any concerns about finding the construction workers to put this all together? It's a big workforce, and we've got limited workforce capacity here.
Mr. Mayor, yeah, that is a concern, and it's one that I've been told not to worry about. Not entirely, but there's a lot of wind construction going on in Wyoming in 2020, and to my knowledge, I can think of about 1,500 megawatts being installed in 2020 alone in Wyoming, and that's 1.5 times our current installed capacity, basically, in the entire state, all going in 1 year. And nationally, there's a really big push, and frankly, that's driven by utilities locking up as cheap a wind as they can get, while the production tax credit is still at 100%. And so when the production tax credit, federal production tax credit, starts phasing out after 2020, then there's probably going to be a little bit of a drop off for about 2 years or so in wind. You'll see a lot more solar development actually probably at that point. But now I'm just
Yeah.
on a tangent.
Mr. Mayor?
Oh, Kevin?
You mentioned life of the project a couple times. What is that? I didn't get a pamphlet. What does the life of the project mean?
Mr. Mayor, it's the life of the project would be 30 years is what these figures are based off of.
Okay.
So yeah, we actually
What happens
model
in 30
life of a
years?
project. We actually model life of the project as 35 years, but yeah, these are based on 30-year operating terms. So, and at the end of 35 years, so through the industrial siting process, part of the Industrial Siting Act is a requirement to post a reclamation bond with the Industrial Siting Division for the full reclamation of the facility, not net of salvage value. And so that's above and below ground to 4 feet. unless a waiver is requested. We're actually requesting a waiver to 3 feet because all of the landowners agreed to 3 feet. But
So in 30 to 35 years, you dig them all up, or do you?
at the end of the operational life, or at the end of our leases with the landowners or whatnot, when the project is done, yeah, you dig them up and you tear them down. But that reclamation is guaranteed through the bond that it will be held the entire time by the DEQ's industrial siting division.
Okay.
And that reclamation plan has to be updated. I believe it's every 5 years. So,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Any other questions for Ryan? Thank you for coming and explaining all of this.
Appreciate your time. Thank you.
It's a big project.
It is. It's a large one. Thanks.
On to restricted parking areas.
Mr. Mayor, Council, we have been working on this concept since the time that we received some concern lodged in a council meeting a number of months ago, which includes working with the school district and the neighbors and the complaining party and so on. And we've come to the conclusion that we don't believe we need an ordinance enacted in order to put together a restricted parking program or allow for a restricted parking area to be enacted, whether it be near Kelly Walsh or NC or the college or whatever the case may be. And so from our standpoint, operationally, we think we can move forward with requests of this nature at sort of the staff level without having to put into place additional legislation. That's not to say that if council wanted some program created via legislation that is prohibitive or prohibited or whatever, we certainly can do that. But we believe that we can move forward and not require ordinance or legislative solutions to make these happen. Just to give you an update with regard to the family that came forward, a few months back, the Schrader family, they again have been talking to staff quite regularly and frequently and so on. They did decide to go forward and apply for what we call a critical parking zone in front of their house. We tried to explain to them some of the limitations and caveats associated with critical parking, and they wanted to move forward anyway. So they have that actively in place right now. The remainder of the neighborhood to us was kind of an interesting question, because as we went around and talked to other neighbors to see what it is that they'd like to have happen in front of their homes, most of them, in fact, all of the ones that we talked to via email or in person, with the exception of one, said they didn't want any kind of restriction in front of their house. And so I'm leery of applying an area or a layer of this nature to that entire street, where most of the neighbors have been reticent to want to do that. So if you go by the area and you aren't seeing signs, it's because the feedback thus far has been very isolated to one or two houses on that street versus the entire street wanting a restriction of this nature. So really this is more of a status update, if you will, on this matter. If you wanted to give additional direction that would, be a legislative solution, then we can certainly discuss that as well. But at this point in time, we feel like we can accommodate a restricted parking request. We can also accommodate critical parking requests, which has been in place for a long time, as many of you know. But we are reticent to move forward on that particular street en masse, given some of the feedback that we've received lately. So that's the issue.
Questions for Carter? Do you think it's just that there's more off-street parking around Kelly than NC? Just trying to wonder why. Because we did put that in place at NC to restrict the parking around there. So.
Mr. Mayor, I think the situation has improved lately, given the opening of their far northern parking area on campus there, and so maybe that's as well as locking a number of the doors around sort of the south end of that building. And so I think the problem is coming to a conclusion, if you will, but the option still exists where we can do restricted parking for neighborhoods that are interested.
Or individual.
Or individuals. Correct.
Okay. Everybody okay with Vice Carter's handling this? Okay. All right, sounds good. Boy, we're just cruising. Okay, annexation policy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council has been conversing about annexation, informally, if you will, for some time. We certainly are very interested in having a conversation with all of you with regard to annexation, given that we effectively have one more year before we need to complete some annexations to allow for a more favorable census result that's coming up, as you know, in 2020. And so with that deadline in mind, we certainly would like to get direction from you that would indicate the parameters that you're comfortable with as it relates to annexation and potentially what we could bring forward by way of recommendation. And then, of course, we would suggest, once we get that and we get recommendations in front of you, that we move forward and make some annexations happen. Because indeed, if we don't meet those deadlines, we have another 10 years, basically, to have those kinds of population numbers work in our favor, particularly as it relates to a sales tax perspective. And so to give you a feel for what we are facing, Casper is almost riddled, if you will, with regard to islands of jurisdiction within the city's limits. There's a number of pockets that are county jurisdiction within the limits of the city. There are a number of jurisdictions, or I should say neighborhoods, that are in separate jurisdictions, albeit contiguous to the limits of the city. And there's a number of neighborhoods and areas in our community that have taken city services and have committed to annexing when the time is appropriate in exchange for receiving those services. And as a matter of fact, ordinance has allowed the city to charge those who have services and are outside the limits of the city a premium with regard to receiving those services. We are a little concerned right now that that policy has not been evenly applied over time. And so as a result of this sort of inward investigation, if you will, we are a little worried that we haven't been charging what we should have been over the years with regard to those who are taking services and are outside the limits of the city. Denise, could you show us kind of the layer that puts the county islands throughout the city
Sure.
in focus here?
So there's several areas within City of Casper that technically are within the Natrona County District. Just sitting down with Natrona County planning officials, they knew some of these problematic areas just by memory. We have several, as you'll see this pocket here. So this tannish colored area just represents pockets of jurisdiction that are in Natrona County within City of Casper. We have roughly that have been identified just based upon memory about 18 separate areas, some more complex than others. We'll go through a few of them. So you'll see pockets here. This area especially is of concern because I believe we're getting close to the Fort Casper area. Let's see, let me turn some imagery on. But we have areas in which even different jurisdictions between Mills, Mills, Casper, and Natrona County also meet. So we have pockets here of Natrona County. Let's take a look. Also out in PV is a great example. There is the trailer port here, that's Natrona County, and then also this area that runs alongside Robertson Road and the river. As you can see, there is someone that does currently participate in a sewer agreement and I believe water agreement as well. But all of these additional parcels and properties do not, with the exception of this one that also cuts through the middle. But these are blanketed throughout the city limits. Trying to locate. Yes. This is the one that's, I think, the most interesting. So we have Town of Mills here, we have Fort Casper, we have Isaac Walton, and we have Casper. So what's really interesting is that here we have Mills, so not even all of Fort Casper is within the city of Casper, and Natrona County, where Isaac Walton is located, is not as well. So these are the ones that are freckled and just spotted throughout the city. Numerous ones, these were of course just ones we identified on memory, but the initiative is to identify and see if we can locate more.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the question that I think is probably worth considering on a greater detail is one that many cities and towns throughout the country struggle with, because not only do you have a number of jurisdictional questions when you come from street to street and everything else in many communities around the country, but you also have a number of pockets of citizens who are receiving services at nearly a subsidized rate, if you will, with regard to the services that they receive just by virtue of vicinity to the particularly for those that are surrounded entirely by a host municipality. In Wyoming, annexation questions are a little more difficult with the layer of the statutes that statutes provide. As it relates to that notion of being surrounded by a host municipality or community, the question gets a little easier. Contiguity makes it a little tougher, but if agreements indeed are in place, depending on how the language is written and those kinds of things, the annexations become a little more complex. And oftentimes, as you might guess, can be somewhat of a political sort of dialogue and question, if you will. There's a lot of motivations for annexation. In my estimation, the motivation that I would recommend you kind of follow and keep your eye on, if you will, as it relates to this moment in time in comparison to the census and with regard to some of the financial advantages we could gain if we do this right, I would suggest that the ones of highest priority would be islands that have a high residential count and a low investment expectation in terms of kind of catching up their services to a particular standard that the city might have. We actually have a neighborhood within the limits of the city that isn't actually in the city's limits that has a high population density, and all the streets are privately maintained and owned. In my opinion, that to me is an easy one, kind of a low-hanging fruit annexation question, because there is no expectation that we build their streets and sidewalks and lights and so on, but yet they access our streets and services every time they come in and out of their neighborhood. And so for what I would recommend and probably provide on the list of areas that we would want to consider, that to me would be one to give very serious consideration to. On the other hand, where you have a pocket in our community that is very industrial and has gravel roads and no residential component, that to me is less attractive at this moment in time, because it does not provide an immediate return, if you will, given that it doesn't have any residential nature to it. And so it is likely that if you're comfortable with these sort of broad parameters as it relates to the annexation question, we will bring you a list of recommended areas to annex that are either, more dense and don't need a lot of investment, or have annexation agreements that do bring residential areas into the community and have effectively agreed to come into the community because of their annexation agreements that are in place and have probably been put in place some years ago. I would suggest that not doing any annexation would represent an opportunity lost, and so I'm hopeful that you'll see some of that value and want to move forward. The other thing that I would suggest that we probably ought to give some serious consideration to, because I can't find that this question has been answered via formal direction, and that's with regard to our policies moving forward as it pertains to those who do want to come into the community. Currently, although it has been the practice for a number of years, we don't have any formal direction from the council or a council that would say when folks want to annex and they want services, or if they want services and don't want to annex, policy should be in place governing how those decisions and those agreements should be written. For example, if we have a neighbor to our community that lives in a neighborhood where services can be accessed or whatever, water, sewer, etc., my recommendation would be that they would be required, as a condition of receiving those services, to sign what I have historically called a pre-annexation agreement that gets their commitment in writing, that says when the city is ready to move forward with annexation, whether contiguous or not at the time of signing the agreement, that they will forego their opportunity to object and annex when the council decides it's appropriate to do. That's a pretty typical framework for an annexation agreement, and I think it would help if there were an ordinance or a resolution of some sort that would indicate that direction and memorialize that understanding moving forward. Again, it's been a practice for a long time. For some reason, it hasn't been memorialized. I think now's our opportunity to clean that up and have that policy in place from a formal standpoint.
Questions? Chris?
Well, I recommend that we get a detailed map of the areas that you want included for annexation, and then I don't see a need for an ordinance on a policy or philosophy, but a resolution would be fine as far as people accepting city services and the expectation that they may become annexed.
Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I totally agree with what you're saying, Carter. I think that's headed the right direction. I think if I remember right, our water system has had a policy if they're supplying water and or sewer from our system, that they had to agree to that, but I don't know how much teeth we really had in that. So I think if we have a policy within the city of Casper, I think it would just make that a much better deal.
Other questions, comments? I appreciate you bringing this up because it is the right time to do it. And it does make a big difference in terms of our tax revenue.
It does.
And so the argument you're making is that they're using our streets, they're accessing our parks, other things that we provide, but because they're not residents, we don't get the sales tax we should get.
That is exactly the argument.
Mike?
Mr. Mayor, I do have I guess a question and a thought that doesn't relate directly to this, because I certainly agree that we need to clean up these pockets and that kind of stuff. But the other thing that I'm concerned about, you sit there and you look at the map, and we certainly don't want to end up like St. Louis or Denver or something where we're landlocked by all the smaller little outfits. And I'm, I'd like to surround them instead of them surround us.
Well, we do have our growth boundaries pretty well laid out though, now, don't we?
That's an agreement.
Bob?
Just one specific question, I guess. The trailer park on Robertson Road, that in itself represents a number of homes. So that would be kind of an immediate target, in my opinion. But
So how do we handle it when the streets and the lights aren't up to code? I mean, they obviously don't have the wherewithal to take care of that, the owners.
Mr. Mayor, that's a great question. Generally speaking, what I've seen happen is there can be agreements put in place if the streets are publicly held. And not all of the neighborhoods that we will bring forward will have that feature. Some of them will actually be privately held streets and privately maintained corridors and those kinds of things. In that circumstance, I would say we would really have little expectation that we would need to rebuild their streets for them or install sidewalks or whatever. On the other hand, where you do have some neighborhoods where those standards are different and so on, my suggestion would be that over time we would build their needs into our capital plan and from a priority basis, just like we do with every street in our community, forecast their development and build them as priority would dictate. In some cases, I've seen an application of local assessment districts to try to get those things put into place. Generally speaking, though, to try to put that onto a neighborhood, like say, for example, the Allendale neighborhood, would probably not be something I would recommend. It's likely not going to be a recommendation you'll see come from staff. But you have a lot of options available to you.
Because you have to get 50% to agree before you can put an LED in place, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Bob?
yeah, one other question, Westland Park, they agreed to come into the city about, I want to say 1990, somewhere in there. And when they came in the city, it was sewer and water because their water system and sewer system were not good. And when they did that, they had to agree to come into the city on demand, which they did do, but they were left without any requirements for curb and gutter. Now, they were required to pay for the paving, as I recall, and I don't recall how that was done. I think it might have been with an assessment, but I don't honestly remember. But that would be another tool that we could use.
Sure.
So,
Sure.
So you'll be able to give us some options and show us those more dense areas. And will we get any sense of how this will be received, or will we just identify the area and then find out?
Well, Mr. Mayor, what I plan to do is produce a map or a chart or whatever that would indicate what the return would be and what the expected investment over time might be. For those that are completely surrounded, their opportunity to object from a statutory standpoint is non-existent. For those that might be contiguous and not necessarily surrounded, like perhaps this map would show, even though I'm not necessarily recommending that we move into that neighborhood and try to, bring them into the community, that would probably represent quite a bit more of opportunity for objection, because we don't have the surround statutory requirement met in this circumstance.
And they have their water sewer managed on their own, I assume.
The funny thing about many of these annexations is the agreements are all over the board. And so I don't know the story necessarily with this particular neighborhood that we see on the screen, but a lot of them are agreements that are pretty standard with regard to we provide water and sewer and they're charged a particular rate. I don't know that we'll be facing a lot of independent water districts and those kinds of things. I don't think that's a feature that we see around here anymore, since we've moved into regionalization and those kinds of things. So,
Okay. Chris?
Well, I think we need to be prepared for tremendous pushback. If you do not live in the city, you typically do not want city zoning, codes, regulation. So let's see what all the options are out there, and then I don't think it'd be met favorably.
Chris?
So just typically speaking, so let's just pick the Robertson Road Trailer Park for simplicity's sake. What other changes would they have, like in their everyday lives or pocketbooks or whatever it may be?
Mr. Mayor, from a utility rate standpoint, they would actually see savings in that, assuming that they're paying their out-of-city rate, and I have to confess, we have found that some of that might not be happening, and we want to clear that up. From a property tax standpoint, they're going to see some increase. The reality is, for property taxes, as the city is concerned, that's a pretty nominal amount. We do not get much property tax as a city organization. And so, while it does have the potential to go up, it's going to be fairly nominal. From a utility standpoint, there is the possibility that their franchise fees could see an increase, but I'm not convinced that that will be a noticeable amount either. And beyond that, the sales taxes that they pay is not something that they see. It's a way that the state divides them back to the city. So that is nothing that they would distinguish.
But I think Chris is right. People see living in the city has a lot more rules and regulations and oversight, and there will probably be some exaggeration of those things as this gets communicated in social media, et cetera. So,
Exactly.
Mike?
Well, but like, for instance, with 2760 Robertson Road, if their streets, in quotes, if those are dedicated as county roads now, and if we were to annex that, then we would have to take those on the city streets.
You know, Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I've seen it done a number of ways.
Well, as opposed to if those are in essence private driveways, if they've just not publicly dedicated anything within their plot of ground, then we'd just be bringing in X amount of acreage with a certain number of residents on it, as opposed to having to do something with streets and sidewalks and that stuff. Am I right?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I would agree with that. If they're privately held roads, we don't own them, and we don't maintain them or service them. That's correct.
Or number of chickens per lot.
Well, let's we'll take a look at what you come up with.
Sounds great.
Any other questions for Carter on this? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, the one we've all been looking forward to, liquor license ordinance. So, we kind of pulled back to have an open discussion about the friction points, I guess we could call them. And I know you've had some time to think about it. I made a bunch of calls around the state myself and talked to various people that I can certainly tell you what I found, but what kind of things have people been thinking about since we decided to table it?
I'm still worried about in essence, changing the dram shop liability through the back door, and I appreciate Mr. Henley's legal opinion on that. But I just think that if we're gonna get into that, that the state needs to walk into that with the sides open, going at it through the front. And I appreciate that there are towns that have gone forward and done this. I think they've skated out there on some pretty tenuous ground doing that, because that Supreme Court case was a 3-2 case. We have a totally different Supreme Court now. And I thought, frankly, in my humble legal opinion, the minority two justices, I thought were had a lot better reasoned position than the three in the majority. But that's just my legal opinions are worth exactly what you pay for them. And so I really am concerned about that. But I do, as a general proposition, I think it's a good idea to tell servers that no, you don't just keep feeding more and more to people just because they're paying you.
Let's just back up for a second. Are there any aspects of the changes that are of a concern other than the over-serving section that we discussed, we've already discussed tonight? Steve?
The only other one I would have is, when it comes to licensing and permittees along with, servers being intoxicated in an establishment, I agree that you should not have your wait staff, your server staff being intoxicated. I mean, that's just business 101. It's smart. You don't want drunk people giving out more alcohol than they should, and not taking in the amount of money that they should. But in talking to, we've had a couple discussions with some of the bar owners around here, and I think the best example that was given to me is you take somebody like John Johnson. If he's up at Fire Rock and he decides that he's going to drink a little bit more tonight, and he becomes intoxicated, and then John Barrasso walks through the door, or the mayor, the mayor walks through the door, or the governor, whoever, and his manager comes up to him and says, "Hey, you know, the governor's here and wants to talk to you." So he goes over in an intoxicated state. He is now working. You can call it what you want, but he's working. If he happens to be the only one there and a piece of equipment fails, and they come out and say, "Hey, this piece of equipment failed, what do I do?" He's now working. And the way that's written, he's in violation. He or she, doesn't matter who it is. That licensee or permittee's in violation of that statute the way it's written. So I think that needs to be taken out. It's quite, in my opinion, and also in the opinion of one bar owner here in town, that's written for one person. We have laws in place that can take care of that one person if they become an issue. It's happened for numerous bars that have been shut down in the past because of the issues that come from the person holding the license. So to create another ordinance lumping them in there, I just don't think it needs to be there, that portion of it. I do believe that the server, absolutely, the serving staff itself, they shouldn't be intoxicated, and that should stay in there, but you need to move licensing in. And I'll just pass these around.
Were you waiting to, or, go ahead, John.
I agree serving staff shouldn't be intoxicated while working, but like you said, it's a business 101, not government 101. So I don't think we need to be in the business of creating business policy for private business owners. Personally, if I was a bar owner, yes, my staff wouldn't be intoxicated. But should we create law, basically instituting business policy via government?
Chris, and then Kristen.
I think you've been waiting. Go ahead.
I was just gonna reflect what Steve said. I think there is a pretty general perception that that was specifically written for one bar owner, but it's going to blanket affect them all. And I think there's more people that feel that way that aren't even in the same circles or same, like not just bar owners.
Chris?
I hear the debates on it. There's the thing about regulating businesses, we absolutely do that all the time. You know, what kind of vent hood has to be in a kitchen, what kind of fire escapes have to be. So all those things, that isn't new. I think that's hype. Does this help to serve a greater problem, solve a greater problem? It's hard to make a reasonable argument that it is okay to continue to overserve somebody that's intoxicated. You know, picture going home today and one of your family members is dead by a person that was driving DUI, and you find out that the server and everybody at the bar knew the person was knee-walking drunk, but they have no culpability in it. Because once you get drunk, the very nature of alcohol, so your judgment's gone. Nobody's going to have that epiphany moment and say, "Whoa, I'm messed up. I need to stop, get some water." So, none of those arguments really hold much for me as far as you know, making it illegal, making it be a bad thing. And being drunk in the establishment, if you're an owner, I mean, it's a bad plan. It's the people that are overserved. I guess I wouldn't care so much if the owner's in there drunk. He's gonna make bad decisions and business decisions, but if you recognize that a patron is drunk, yeah, I think you should stop serving them alcohol.
It doesn't say the owner can't be drunk in his establishment, it says you can't.
Be
act-
working,
you can't
be
over-
acting as an agent or something in
The intent being that we don't want the owner to come out and try to help the bouncers or whatever, deal with a situation, but it is much more general, as you say, Steve, to me as I read it, so, Mike?
Well, you know, people are saying that owner provision is directed at one outfit. Well, you know, maybe it's directed at one now, but there might be another one next year, and there might be who knows how many in the future. So if we think that's a good policy, I think it should be in there. But having said all that, you know, I can certainly appreciate that a guy's sitting there kicked back and relaxing, and, you know, a big old fight breaks out. What's he supposed to do? Just sit there and watch the fight? Or, you know, if something breaks, is he just supposed to sit there and watch it? That's a little, you know.
I think so, yeah, for me,
That's,
yeah, Chris?
The other one about this, I mean, I think we can all agree it's stupid if you own a bar to sit in there and get tore up while you're trying to manage your business. I don't know that that element does anything to solve a greater problem, because let's say I've got the bar owner and you're coming in on patrol. Hey, are you drunk? Yeah, I'm not. I'm off duty. Prove I'm not, unless it's an after the fact action that I did. Then you can put some kind of imposition on me. But it's I don't see any of this as being, you know, there's not going to be stings by the police department, or it's not really a proactive law. It's a reactive law to hopefully get people's attention and issue sanctions if you were basically a party to a significant problem. But
John?
I mean, you use the analogy, you know, you come home and your loved one's dead from a drunk driver. You really think that the DUI and manslaughter charge and potential prison time they're going to get that's not going to be enough of a deterrent? This is the deterrent, not the fact that you're going to prison for killing somebody while drunk driving.
But you don't make that decision when you're in there drinking. But it's not a crime of intent. But if someone sees that I'm getting that drunk and I have a potential problem and stops me, then maybe it just none of the next issue even occurs.
I think we're confusing two different things, though. Let's stay focused on.
Right, I was talking about the overservice.
Right, let's
the other
do
one.
that, let's do, if you don't mind, let's do that
Yeah,
after we do the owner, what Steve brought up. And, because we're gonna have a bigger discussion, I think, about the over-serving. That's why I wanted to make sure we got everything else dealt with that needed to be dealt with, so, Mike?
Well, if there might be a better way, rather than saying, you know, thou shalt not be the owner and be in your establishment and be drunk, and if you do, then we're gonna punish you with a criminal sanction. If there, and I know that we're going away from the demerit system, but if there'd be a way that we could fashion some language to put in there emphasizing to owners that, you know, the city considers it to be contrary to the best interests of the community for owners to be sitting in their premises, you know, getting drunk. I don't know how you'd do that or how you'd say that.
I'm just wondering if there's some way to be a little more targeted rather than just say in any capacity. And say the owner may not intervene in any matter involving a customer or directly supervise their staff, something more specific that would allow them to BS with the governor or fix a piece of machinery or. Chris?
I got two things. Do we have the capacity to like promulgate administrative rules that would be able to hold a sanction, you know, that would fall under Administrative Hearing Act or something if they violated them, which we could attach to a liquor license? I guess that would be for Mr. Headley.
I don't know if I know your question. Do you understand what Chris is asking, John?
Mr. Mayor, Council, I think I understand that you would promulgate some rules, but really the difference between the rules and the ordinance may be just the moniker that you're putting on top of them. If you're promulgating them and you're the legislative body, why not just have the ordinance? And we know that we have authority to do that. There are some provisions in the state liquor laws that say that you can modify this provision by rules. So in some ways, it's probably better just to make the rules for those provisions where the legislature has made that specific grant, and then just rely upon your legislative powers through ordinance to, if you want to actually address some specific function or some specific ordinance that we have.
The other thing is, I think we should have a conversation with the chief. These are what points of area that he was looking at, and maybe he can answer questions that we're just thinking about.
I was gonna ask Chief to talk a little bit about the over-serving reasoning when we got to that point, but let's, Bob?
Yeah, just point of clarification for me, I guess. I haven't seen anything in our new ordinance that was different than the old ordinance in terms of this group being able to put conditions on a license. If we consistently have a problem with an owner, we have named names and said, you can't be there. So I just want to make sure that we can still do that. We can still put conditions on a license, just as we could before. Is that a true statement?
Sure.
Mayor and Council, indeed you can, and in fact, we actually kind of looked at that again, and I think probably it's a little bit more legally based now than we had it before. We made a few modifications, but not terribly many, so you still have that ability.
Yeah, that's been our big stick before. As long as we don't.
As opposed to an ordinance change, is what you're suggesting, Bob. Ken?
Kristen, you've had your hand up twice, so.
Oh, did I miss you? I'm sorry.
I'm kind of just listening to. Of course, my tablet decided. How do we define agent? Or is that defined in liquor license verbiage?
Defined in employment law, isn't it?
Is that what it is? Okay. Because I would just almost wonder too, I mean, obviously, this is very, without seeing the actual definition, I mean, to some degree, there are ways to get around like business ownership declaration as far as they could say, all right, we have this one guy that's a problem, he's going to keep drinking there. You're not an owner anymore. You're now, who knows what they constructed as, but now we triple your salary and you're some sort of assistant manager or dishwasher or, so I think we just have to be careful with how that's defined.
Okay, anybody wanna make a suggestion here? I think your motion is to just strike the whole language, Steve, is that right? That whole section?
It looked like the owner was left out of it, everybody else was.
Yeah,
Oh, I'm
everybody
sorry.
left in it, just licensed and permittable, or any license or permit holder.
Mr. Mayor, as you recall, very recently, we had the Urban Bottle come forward, and that actually would include Ms. True, Mr. Griffin, and thank you. And so, in my opinion, that would be a good way to capture it, because if they're the owner of the license, they effectively are the ones with the regulatory risk at stake, if you will. The other employees.
Oh, I see now.
The other employees would not have that same exposure.
Mike?
The only suggestion, and I kind of agree with the idea of sort of decriminalizing that conduct, but I wonder if there'd be any value to putting some further language in there that would read something to the effect of that it shall be the policy of the city to strongly discourage owners from being intoxicated in their establishments, and that such conduct by an owner may result in further administrative action by the city. You know, to put it right in their face, basically saying. And so if somebody says, well, this is my bar, I can do whatever I want, you can sit there and say, well, no, it's right here, you can't. And if there are bad actors, we can, you know, then it's real clear what we're doing. And I don't know, and I would defer to Mr. Henley if he thinks that any further language like that would put the city in a stronger position on anything or not. And that. But I can support making this change because I just don't think with your average owner that it's probably a problem.
And as Bob says, we could make a specific requirement if there is one place that we're concerned about in the renewal process. Other comments on Steve's suggestion?
I can get behind that. I'm just gonna say, I'll get behind that.
Chris?
Yeah, I'm looking at our, the proposed ordinance here. Maybe we should have definitions in there for agent, employee, and, well, we don't have permit holder. I don't think anywhere other than that, but if we had, well, if we're gonna say they can't do this, then we need to say what's the employer, what's the agent, I believe. And I'd like to point out, there's a lot of things that the city council can do, and I will bet you that a lot of the concerns from the police department is that the city council will not act in a timely manner. Because if you think this ordinance is a difficult thing, wait till you start hearing about property rights and taking away somebody's liquor license, and now, instead of just the people that are offering suggestions that are kind of friends, you're about to take away their business and their livelihood. So that's not an easy decision, just left on a case-by-case basis, and I'll bet you that's why some of this is preferred to be nailed down in ordinance, and uniform application of it as well.
And if we did act and did what Bob suggested and actually enforce the laws that we already have, and take action against a liquor license, I've never seen it done since I've been on council, 5 years. No, everybody that's complained about the drinking problem in town has always voted yes on a new liquor license. Nobody has ever voted to restrict a liquor license. It's always just been a push-through, rubber stamp deal. So if you're really serious about it, then why don't we go that route instead of creating an entirely new law that criminalizes bartenders?
I would say if we pull the bartender topic off the line, that this is just modernizing. The demerit system was, it could never accomplish anything. So changing it makes perfect sense. Altering the change is a point of debate, but I wouldn't keep the old one with the demerit system that was just this
We're
paper
not talking about
tiger.
the merit system itself, but we get a report every year that shows calls for service and what the calls are. And we do, the arresting officer at the jail, we have a tracking sheet that tracks where these people get their liquor.
Mhm.
And if we get that report, we could see where the problems are and talk to the liquor license owner themselves and say, hey, this is a problem. You have X amount of time to fix it, or we're gonna start putting restrictions on your liquor license. But that has never happened. Since I've been on council anyway, it's never happened. It's always been a rubber stamp. So now we're taking our job and pushing it off onto the police department, in my opinion. And then making crime where crime shouldn't exist.
So getting back to this original proposal, how do people feel about removing license or permit holder from section B?
I would like to hear from the chief before we make
Okay,
that decision.
Okay. Chief, would you like to tell us your reaction to this?
Mayor, Council, thank you for the opportunity to address this as best as I can. We chose language that was specific to the needs of what we were experiencing as a police department and the harm that was being created in our community. Our primary goal, without question, I would unequivocally state that I do not author things or even recommend things based upon one bad actor. That is not the case. And we've made significant inroads with, I think, the person that people are alluding to. We've made significant inroads with that, and the primary goal of the police department is compliance, not enforcement. So when it comes to our primary goal with this ordinance was not in a small part influenced by some hands-on, direct, face-to-face experience with dealing with the staff of an establishment that were more intoxicated than the already intoxicated patrons that was making things worse. And so trying to incentivize the employers, the employees to be able to do their job correctly, to maintain a sense of their role in the public safety interests of the community. So that being said, our primary goal was the doorkeepers, the ones that are checking the IDs for minors. I would submit to you, if they're a .25, they're going to do a crappy job at spotting a very convincing fake IDs that are $150 on the internet. The servers should not be intoxicated because they themselves then begin to make poorer decisions and are not able to reason through complicated issues on whether or not a person is too intoxicated to be served. The owners and the licensees and the permit holders are generally speaking not our problem. That's kind of the last line of defense. Yes, we've had some issues with that, but by far and away our primary concern is the employee that is the gatekeeper for making sure that minors are not being served and that persons that are in need of assistance to get home safely, that is being recognized and taken care of and addressed rather than continuing to apply them. One of the primary concerns when applying just the math of it, and again, it's not the intention of the police department to become involved in business plans and business strategies. However, in the state of Wyoming, the average server makes a very low hourly wage. I mean, everybody in this room understands it. It's as low as approaching $2 an hour, and so they're relying upon those tips. So we're placing the burden upon our waiters, our waitresses, and our bartenders, who their family income, their financial stability is based upon the amount of tips they can have. And I would submit to you that the more times I serve your table, the more rounds I encourage you to buy, that's more opportunities for me to increase my personal income, but at what cost to the community? So we were trying to focus this, the intent of the please don't be intoxicated while acting as an agent is the intent for the ones that are hands-on making the decisions. Is this a minor or is this somebody that needs help rather than more drinks? Councilman Walsh, did I answer your question?
You did then.
Any other questions for Chief on the intoxicated servers? I'm fine with taking out any license or permit holder. They're not the ones making those judgment calls for the most part as far as who's inebriated or who's a minor. Kristen?
Sorry, business structure is just something that I've dealt with a lot, and I think the definition of agent is somewhat imperative for this section. The other thing is, some companies are structured so that there's a property ownership and that there's an operating ownership. So there's basically they separate out the land and the building into one company, and then the actual operations, day-to-day cash flow into one. Those have a tendency to be S corporations, which means that any and all people are employees, including owners. And so, obviously that's not on us, but I mean, that would be another way of, just because they're not standing there pouring a beer doesn't mean that they are not defined as an employee. If they are receiving W-2 wages, I think that defines them as an employee. So I think employee and agent have to be defined.
Mr. Henley, is that something you think we can clarify in this ordinance?
Certainly be happy to, sure. And I'd be happy to work with you, Councilwoman Boots, if you like. Okay.
Get that in the definition section. If that's defined carefully, are we okay with Steve's recommendation? Thumbs up for that? Okay. Good enough. On to the main event. I think we want to just have a general conversation. Would people like the chief to talk first, or do you want to discuss it amongst ourselves first? And
I would have a question, maybe the chief could answer. Would it be considered over-serving if I went to a liquor store and bought a 24-pack of beer and drank all of it at my house and then went out and did something stupid with the cashier of Walmart or a liquor store be held liable for that?
Absolutely not. You know, this is an intent law. This is a knowledge-based law. At the time that you purchased it, you were not intoxicated. They have no way of predicting your future actions, therefore cannot be held. There's no criminal liability. There's no civil liability there. That is not the intent of this whatsoever.
Okay.
The intent, the word intent, it might not be the intent, but what does the law say? Because bottom line, when you put it into law, the law is the law. Intentional, non-intentional, it doesn't matter. If it says, and he goes out and say he hits my kid, runs over my dog, whatever. Yeah, there's other law, but I could pull this up and say, wait a minute, he would have never done that if he would have never got overserved of this 24-pack, so forth, blah, blah. I guess my thing of it is, and due all respects to you and with this, people throw out the word intent a lot, but bottom line, when you want to hold somebody to the law, the letter is
Serving is the definition.
is it.
Well, the law's clear on the point. Basically, no person shall sell, serve, give, or deliver, or aid in the sale, service, delivery, or procurement of a malt or alcoholic beverage to any person who has become obviously intoxicated. It's not future actions, that who has become, you're watching it, you can see it. And so no, not the stocking up and then getting hammered when you're outside the control of anybody that's watching them or where they're buying.
Any comments? May we have questions for the chief that people would like to ask? Steve, go ahead.
Well, I would like to hear from the chief on this.
Would you
issue
like to
too.
just
It's-
take questions and people can just kind of,
So if I can just address the concerns over intent. Remember that the police department in our role will have to be able to present for prosecution a viable crime. We would have to show that somebody knowingly or should have had reasonable expectations of having known that what they were doing was wrong and chose to do otherwise. And so in the circumstances that Councilman Johnson has given us, that clerk would have no way of, the person wasn't obviously intoxicated. So that is not the intent of this. However, to take an opposing, more extreme example, the waiter that has been serving a patron at their table and is on now, the 11th drink of distilled liquor. A reasonable person should begin to go, this is going to be a problem, and we're now getting into the area where they knew or should have known and yet chose to do otherwise. So nothing absolves us, the police department, of coming in and having to do a competent investigation to look at the facts that are present and to view those facts from the point of view of the average citizen. Would that average citizen, should they have known, or should have been inherently obvious to them? And knowing that, chose to continue in that behavior. So it's a very high threshold. This is a crime that is preventative in nature. It's designed to create education and training within our establishments, within the businesses, for the persons that are serving and performing these responsibilities in the establishments. So there's still a very high threshold. If we're under the illusion that all of a sudden there's going to be hundreds of people booked into jail for this, that is not going to be the case, because it's going to be a very high threshold for us to obtain. This is more intended to empower the owners and the employees themselves. So the employee that is working for an establishment that they're kind of being pressured. Sales are down this month. We need to increase stuff. It kind of empowers the employee to time out here. The city of Casper has an ordinance that kind of precludes us from getting too carried away. There's a lot of examples where this can be effective for us in the internal mechanisms of those businesses while having those businesses remain profitable. This is not intended to reduce profit margins or jeopardize businesses. I firmly believe that businesses can thrive and prosper through good business practices.
Chris? I see a couple follow-up questions here on one from Sheridan and then one from Cheyenne. Cheyenne has a similar law, Sheridan has a similar law. Cheyenne has not seen a positive effect from the law. Sheridan has seen a decrease in crime around the establishments with an increase of calls. Sheridan also requires reporting all crimes in progress that they see. So what about this, Chief? What if we follow this up with a resolution and say we want responsible operation inside the bars, and that we'll take recommendations from you? If this were taken out, we'll take recommendations from you and we'll put stipulations on their license, and then that is going to require everybody in this room to stand behind the chief when he says, I got a problem at this bar, and we're going to look right at a problem guy and we're going to point at him and say, you are not what we want, which becomes a lot more difficult than a blanket ordinance. But I'd be willing to sit here and as the council say, okay, if this is causing so much problem, we want to solve the problem. We see a couple different communities where one favorable, one not so favorable on the outcome, but we take action against those bad actors, but we do that based on the chief's recommendation and the background that he's got on individual licenses. But I think if we take it out, we follow that up with a resolution that we will do this. Does that help? Is that a compromise that you could tolerate at all?
So let me try to address, let me answer that, and forgive me if I go around about and try to address some of the other things that you mentioned. First of all, remember that Cheyenne, they're very new into the game. I'm not even sure that they're a full year into their ordinance. And so I'm not sure if that's been given time for them to show any fruit or lack thereof on there. Sheridan's response is very significant for us, and I'm not sure what's written on here. But in our conversations with Sheridan, what they found was I'm quoting them, fourfold increase in communication from the establishments of, hey, we're fixing to have a problem, can you come help us head that problem off? So before it becomes the fight, before it becomes the blood and the mayhem and other things, the establishments, through the passing of this, is actually summoning police to help diffuse those situations before that turns into the tragedy, which is, in my opinion, that's a pretty good, that is a good outcome on it. So at least that's from the chief's perspective in Sheridan. When it comes to the council's ability to hold people accountable, Councilman, the only true concern that I would have is if I have, and choose these words carefully, if I have criminal statutes which I can take advantage of that allows me to obtain and secure evidence of that crime. So the server was intoxicated and that led to the problem. Then I'm somewhat empowered to get through lawful methods the level of intoxication of the server. If we do it by resolution and the intent of council, I'm a little bit more hampered on my ability to get you data by which you can take action. I would submit to you that we're going to have people stand before council and go, I wasn't intoxicated. The police officers completely they misread it, so forth and so on. And so if you're willing to look at the totality of circumstances, to take an objective view of the video cam footage, where as we begin to implement the body cameras, which is we're trying to speed that up. That's going to be very helpful for council to have a bird's eye view, so to speak, of what the officers were dealing with and what they were faced with. If you're willing to take action on that incomplete information, then that may be something that absolutely is effective for council. The fight that an owner is going to put up for their license, their livelihood, their continuation of business. You know, so when you go to them and say, hey, we're having all these problems. The police department is reporting all of this. Here's some data that we've gathered. We're going to suspend your license for 7 days. You know, remember that some of these establishments, 7 days is a lot of income, and it's something that they're going to want to fight over. So, not sure that I answered your question. I think it's problematic to go all one way or all the other way. I would suggest, literally, that there's a hybrid issue here, and that was our intent, was that we incentivize the servers, the establishments to help us reach our public safety goals, but on the back end we still require, and nothing is relieved by having these two new criminal ordinances. Nothing is relieved council from being the ultimate deciders over the validity of their continued use of that liquor license.
So Chief, one of the things they did in Cheyenne is they added some language saying that the establishment, it would be acceptable for the establishment to have an inebriated person there while they're trying to basically create a safe situation for that person, whether it be a ride home or a timeout, as long as they didn't continue to serve them. And for some reason that seemed important to them to have that in the statute to give them that protection so that they couldn't be sanctioned for simply having a drunk person in the establishment. Did you consider any language like that?
Certainly, Mayor, Council, let me address that. You know, before bringing anything to you, I did my research on what existed. It actually criminalizes in Cheyenne. It's actually against our ordinance to have an intoxicated patron in the person. Could be a staff employee, could be the boss, could be the owner. It criminalizes them having that person in there unless they are, you know, taking an affirmative action at sobering them, helping them, aiding them. You know, and it was not our intent to go into an establishment and say, you're drunk and you're in here, find me somebody to enforce this on, because that's not this. Our intent was, they're obviously drunk, you just served them. Well, you know, what are you thinking? So when it comes to, you know, the intoxicated patron that they're trying to sober up, that they're monitoring and helping while they're waiting for the Uber ride, while they're waiting for their cousin to come get them, that is absolutely still within the purview of what we're trying to accomplish. And so we're not taking action on. We actually want to reward that behavior and empower them to do exactly that.
Now, the other objection I'm sure everybody else has heard here is, in today's world, you know, person ate a couple edibles, came in, they didn't look too bad, gave them one drink, and the combination just overwhelmed them. And so, but I only served them the one drink. But now I'm looking like I overserved because of the condition they were in before they even got here. Or somebody drinks in the parking lot and then comes in, but they don't look inebriated immediately until after I serve them that first drink.
So and again, Mayor, Council, the only thing I can reassure you is one, please imbue us with a certain amount of faith that we have to do a complete investigation. So if I find somebody that's obviously intoxicated and they've been served one drink, and yet we put a PBT on them and they're a .02, that's compelling evidence that the server could not have reasonably anticipated that. And so it's not our intent to needlessly punish people that did not have a set of fact circumstance that they could make a reasonable decision. This person should or should not be served. Without that reasonable opportunity, there's no crime there. There's no enforcement action to be had.
And the other thing in Sheridan that I was curious about, because you've done your homework with this too, is that what they've told me is that this has only been used when there was some other infraction, and on interview, the person said, well, I drank at such and such place. That was done after the fact. How, are we in a situation where the serving has to be observed, or can it simply be reported?
So again, you're asking for a legal definition of a successful prosecutable case. We have to go through steps to show that the person knew or should have known, that person is obviously intoxicated, and knowing that they served them. The easiest, most simple prosecution is we get dispatched, and there's the ruckus, and the waitress walks up, and here's your order. Or, what do you that's happening on our side. That's very easy to prosecute. And we have a fact pattern that the judge, a jury, the fact deciders can look at those facts and make a simple decision on. Absent that perfect scenario, it places a heavy burden on us to be able to establish that. And so when it comes to cuffing people up and escorting them out in front of their coworkers and doing the perp walk through the bar, that would be an extreme exception versus us gathering our information, developing a case, making sure our ducks in a row, and issuing a court summons based upon the information that we've been able to gather.
Witnesses and the whole 9 yards.
Right.
Chris?
So we have the problem, but problem exists at a hypothetical problem. A fight, a DUI, fatality accident, whatever stems from over serving. And then this, a lot of these things are video recorded, so as far as taking somebody's word for it, the bars even have surveillance in there where you can see physical manifestations, but then they would end up with a charge on top of it. Go ahead.
Sean?
Did you have one, Kristen, first?
Oh, geez, I was too
I'm sorry.
Maybe I'll just.
Yeah, throw something at me.
The one thing I would say is every bar owner that we talked to and every bartender that I talked to unanimously agreed that people who are overly intoxicated, like to the point where they're not even aware of where they are, almost never tip or are very poor tippers. That was unanimous. I haven't had a single person come and say that, oh yeah, well when they're blackout drunk, they're just for like $200 and then they sign and then they go home. I don't know that that's true. The other thing about concerning profit margin for these businesses and that we're not trying to harm their profit margin or that we're concerned for them, the second this goes in, their insurance premiums go up. The Sheridan bar owners, one of the bar owners here had spoken with one of the bar owners in Sheridan, and they did see an increase in premiums, specifically referenced to a similar ordinance being passed in Sheridan, and that does affect profit margin. So I mean, that is something to remember. I know this kind of goes back into the liquor license and like when things are up for renewal. Has it truly been discussed as far as making this more of an education piece and a requirement that, say within 90 days of hire, any server, owner, whomever it may be, and this is in order to keep their liquor license, it's required for them to have certain specific training. I know that there's tips training, but it's not required, correct?
I don't think so.
It is in Sheridan.
And so I guess I didn't know of, couldn't we do where, say for whatever, 12 months, 24 months, even altering the required education to have an over-serving piece or whatever that may be, wouldn't that be worth a try before we just turned it into a crime?
Mayor, Councilman, excellent question. And a lot of effort has gone into And we actually ran a pilot program with the staff of the Gaslight Social. It is the intent of the police department, and everything's kind of been bogged down as we work through the discussions that we're having today. It's the intent of the police department to offer on a quarterly basis free training, enhanced training that is meaningful, valuable, and job specific and job related to all of our licensed liquor establishment employees in the city. That gives them that window of opportunity to get in and get that training. In addition, it's enhanced far greater than the tips training. In full disclosure, some of the retailers had recommended that we actually codify that in the ordinances, that we require them to attend training, that they have X amount of days and all employees have to be trained. In full disclosure, I was resistant to that because then that requires the police department to go in and verify compliance with that, which is problematic. Line up your employees, whip out your certifications. 7 of you don't have it. Here's your sanctions. I didn't want to be the police department. I did not want to police their hiring practices and their training practices. I wanted them to take accountability for, in the best interest of their business, they make sure that they present their people for training. Not because the police department requires it, but because they've learned through experience that this is valuable training that helps them to be a productive member of our community, a profitable business, to help us improve our quality of life and reduce our cost of living. So we can do that. And either way, the police department is committed to providing enhanced, meaningful training to our retailers. And that's never going to go away. I'm committed to it. I have experience with this. It helps, and I know that it works. We're still going to be doing that on top of this, and so it's what I would suggest in trying to respond to your query in the best way that I can. There is no one single silver bullet that's going to fix some of the issues in our community. Education is going to get us X amount of percent. Encouraging people to not continue to serve people who are getting intoxicated, that's going to help a percentage. Working with our youth and changing generational issues, that's going to get us another percentage. All these things manifest over time. We're just trying to add up enough of these percentages that eventually we sit back as the governing body of this community and go, wow, Casper's a better community. Our cost of living, our insurance rates, things like that have gone down.
Sean? So this obviously isn't going to apply to servers and bartenders in other bars outside the municipality, right?
I would have no jurisdiction over them.
So you give another economic advantage to bars outside of Casper.
Chris? All right, so keep this perspective in mind. I'm from here. We hear the Wyoming way whenever we want to rationalize bad behavior. We throw it out there, but I'm from here, so my perspective might be from that issue. But my problem with this is I'm not convinced this is going to solve the problem externally out on the streets outside the bar. And if it's a bachelor party, the bachelor's being overserved and well taken care of, which in my experience, I'm a little cynical on that, probably wouldn't be, but has a designated driver taking care of them. That's not against the law, and do we care? Do we want to criminalize that? So the issue is people go to the bar, you have a designated driver, you have something like that, and they get intoxicated. Why is that a problem? They're old enough. The only law that would be, the law that would be a violation would be the person serving them. And of course, the public intox law, but you really open a can of worms when you arrest a drunk out of a bar for PI. So that chunk right there, I'm not convinced that that's gonna solve a problem. You'll see it from a different perspective, so I'm not discounting it. because you didn't grow up here doing the same thing, you know what I mean? So, that's why I raised the question.
Okay, thank you, Mayor, Councilman. Excellent points. Again, let's disassociate. Let's try to separate out some of the concerns we're facing. Whether you're aware of it or not, we've had a very strong increase in street inebriation. That's a different problem. These particular ordinances are going to only have a marginal impact on it. So I think the packaged liquor store, that the street inebriate comes in and they're obviously intoxicated and they provide them more. It does help us a little bit with that, but street inebriation is a different animal. It's going to require different approaches. When it comes to to stopping people from serving somebody that's already intoxicated, again, remember the goal. My goal as the chief of police is a broader public safety goal. It's not just that they had a designated driver. They still got to get home and they got to face their spouses when they get home and do so without domestic violence. They got to not be walking through the parking lot and remember some slight that they had in the bar and get, because they're not thinking right, they smash the window of the car that they're walking by. Just a random act of vandalism or violence. Those are the things we're also trying to prevent. So it's not just a matter of avoiding the DUI tragedies. That's very low-hanging fruit, easy to focus on, but the ramifications of getting somebody super intoxicated or participating in that and then turning them loose out on the streets is problematic, and it ultimately it results in an increase in police response. Some of the information that's been disseminated to council while I was gone includes hours of the day and days of the week, and you can see that there's some direct correlation to those nighttime bar activities. So when it comes to dealing with the bachelor party, the well-run bachelor party I'm not even ever going to know about. And, the one that's organized and is not a problem, doesn't result in fisticuffs and hospital visits, we're not even going to know about that. The average home, we don't respond to the average home, because there's a drunken brouhaha at that home. And so, but there can be circumstances where it's still within the city, the community's best interest to exercise to allow us to use some discretion on that. For example, it wouldn't take long for us to Google here on your computers, 21-year-old dies on his birthday of alcohol poisoning because some friend, some homeowner, lined up 21 shots of vodka and challenged him to do it, and kept urging him on, and then all of a sudden, the tragedy occurs. There should be some accountability for actions like that, and so that's why I've chosen to have language that allows for that, but it's still working under the realization that's not our focus. The average, the family gathering where we're sharing wine, that's not the intent of this. And it doesn't draw police attention. It doesn't end in acts of violence and things like that. And so that's not our intent. But under certain extreme examples, it's helpful to have some tools at our disposal to deal with those that everybody would agree, boy, that is a shameful tragedy. We don't want that to become what our community is known for. A series of those, so it provides opportunities for us without that becoming the priority of the police department, because this is not our priority. This is not the priority, is to go police people's homes and their personal drinking habits and things like that.
Steve.
Thank you, sir. So, I got a few things to discuss. So going back, looking at the 2017 alcohol and crimes in Wyoming, DUI from 2013 to 2017, both public intox and DUIs are down over 50% in the state. Not saying that we don't have an issue here, and I'm not trying to downplay it, but it's down 50% from where it's at. In each of these counties, it talks about drugs and alcohol issues, not once in any of these. It gives you the 3 highest counties in each of these different areas: methamphetamine, marijuana, public intox, driving under the influence. Not once is Natrona County mentioned in any of that. I believe, I worked with the alcohol dealers on the demerit system. That was the worst system that we've ever had. It would take so many violations to rack up enough points to even suspend anybody at any point in time. I completely agree with the fact that if we have the power sitting here and we have a problem bar, then we should use that and put some sanctions against it or that bar when it comes time for renewal itself. My biggest fear here is we are going, in my opinion, we are going from crawling to running, and we're not even stopping long enough to learn how to walk in the middle of it. When you go back and look at it, you look at law enforcement today, and correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, I'm throwing these numbers out there, but I've checked into this, and I'm pretty sure I'm pretty close. About 35 hours of classroom time and wet labs are put into law enforcement training for them to identify what a intoxicated person looks like. And when we look at it, we're telling servers and serving staff that you overserve a person and you can't identify the fact that a person is impaired, you're going to get a citation for that. It's criminal, and they haven't even been provided the basics of training, even a moment of training. If their serving staff or their bar that they work for doesn't put them through your class or put them through tips training itself. So I'll pass out my other amendment is I think that first of all, this over-serving needs to go. I'm just going to rack up some points here tonight, but I think the over-serving needs to go. And you look at I took this off the city of Gillette. This is, I'll tell you, if you were to sit down with the alcohol dealers 3 years ago when I had the conversation with them and I talked about bringing up tips and making tips mandatory for all their employees, they did not want that. They were mad because I brought that idea up. But this is what the argument's about. We're talking about over-serving people. And we haven't even taken the time to stop in the middle and say, let's educate these people on how to identify at what point a person becomes too impaired to drink. So my amendment here would be to make tips mandatory within 90 days. That you may think that's too long. I looked at 90 days because if law enforcement is going to be involved in doing some of this serving, that it would be quarterly. We're not putting a huge burden on them if we're to continue to do the chief's training. If you did tips training, same thing. I mean, they're only classes are only offered every so often, so that could be adjusted 60 days up in Gillette. But you have to provide them education. You cannot, in my opinion, you just can't hire somebody today and write them a ticket tomorrow because they didn't understand. And they may not have understood. They may not understand looking at a person they're too impaired. So let's provide them the training that they need. They're gonna, by this, the way it's written, we'll have to have a logbook that is open to inspection during business hours. I'm sure if something happened at the establishment, it was after business hours, you can still get it at that point, but they have to have a book there to be able to show that, yes, employee A through Z that has worked here more than 90 days has attended this training, has a certificate of this training, and any other training that's required to keep that certification is up to date. And if it's not, then we deal with it when we come back for renewal time. And the second page of this is, it's the server training program. And in the training itself, if people violate what they're being taught, they can have their certificate revoked. And if we revoke their certificate, they can no longer have it in the book, which means they can no longer serve alcohol or be in that position at the establishment. So to me, if you want teeth in something, this is it. mandate tips training, and then when they, if they violate it or they lose their certification, that's generally gonna be your problem employee anyways. They're not gonna be able to do their job.
Before we discuss Steve's proposal, did you have something else, Mike? Were you waiting? Or do you want
No.
to go move ahead to this?
The only thing I would throw out there for people to think about when I noticed the DUI numbers as well, and those are significantly down over the years, especially in particular to Casper here. The state legislator did us no favor when they put the search warrant law in effect, creating a DUI arrest into such a lengthy, cumbersome process that I promise you, the DUIs haven't gone down. The officers are finding more creative ways to solve it, and they're not charging DUI. Because instead of 5, 6, or 7 hours waiting for a search warrant that will never be fulfilled, they're doing different things to get these people off the road. You'll never be able to quantify that, but I promise you that's one of the reasons you're seeing that big decrease in the numbers from today as opposed to 5 years ago.
Bob, what is your, then, go ahead, Bob, and then give you a chance to respond to what Steve suggested.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I really support this, Councilman Friel. I think this is probably a good way to go, and I say that from personal experience. I spent a number of years in the mining business, most of which came under MSHA in about the early 1970s. And today, to go to work in a mine, you have to have 24 hours of training before you can even step foot on a mine property to go to work. That has caused the mining industry to stand up and take notice on what safety training is, and I mean it includes enclosed spaces, it includes regular safety training, CPR, refresher training for first aid. And today, the mining industry is the safest industry in the state of Wyoming, bar none, to work in. And these guys are around big trucks, big machinery, dealing with dangerous chemicals, and they have to have every year, you go to work for the mine, you have to have 24 hours of training. And you go to work for another mine, you have to prove that you had that 24 hours of training before you can step foot in the mine. But that still needs another 8 hours of annual refresher training. Right now, the mines that work in the state of Wyoming have safety organizations in place that do the job. There is commercial training available at Casper College, and a number of people in town teach that. But if you go to work in a mine, you gotta supply your MSHA card to the mine before you go to work, and I don't see this as being a bit different. You cannot just hire some 21-year-old kid off of the street and say, by the way, you're gonna serve liquor. And it happens right now. And I think to just overstep this and not try this, I think would be a terrible mistake. So I think this is a good idea.
So, Chief, require training and deal with the bad actors instead. What do you think?
Absolutely. You know, again, this is a council decision, and we are trying to do what council wants. Mayor, may I address some of Mr. Friel's comments? When you mentioned the 35 hours of training for a police officer is for a very high legal standard for a person that's impaired to the slightest degree or a .08 per se, which is far different from, wow, that person is obviously intoxicated. Doesn't require nearly as much training. When you mentioned the 2017 Alcohol and Crime in Wyoming report, I feel obligated to point out there's huge discrepancies in the numbers. So for example, if you go to page 42 where it discusses Casper in particular, it lists 265 public intoxication arrests when in fact we had 402. It does not, when it shows the percentage of alcohol-related arrests, it doesn't even take into account the DUI arrests that happened, which was 258 and is up just under 30% in 2018 to 332. So the information contained in this report is flawed across the board, and I can't explain that. It's derived from the booking report that is then captured by another third party, compiled and published. And so, but one of the things to take into account also is, generally speaking, when the officers are arresting somebody, they've got dispatched to somebody who's intoxicated, causing a disturbance. We get there, we find out that they have a warrant, or they're on probation. There's a bond revocation. There's a probation pickup on them. As soon as we find out that, we, all things, kind of cease. And when we get them to the booking, because there's not an addition, a criminal charge being brought against them, a new one, then I can't guarantee that the form is always being filled out on that. So the report, the 2017 Alcohol and Crime Report, is vastly different from the actual numbers that I went and verified 45 minutes before the meeting today. When it comes to the training, the department absolutely 100% is committed to training. If you legislate mandatory training, we're going to provide it because it works. And we're committed to that, whether it's legislated or not. We're committed to providing to that training because that education works. I firmly believe in it. You've heard testimonials from Mr. Galloway that his staff learned and grew, and it was something that they had not been exposed to. It really caused them to think and discuss amongst themselves. We're committed either way. If you add this, we can live with that.
Okay.
Thank you.
And as an alternative to, is what you're proposing,
That's
as
what
an
I'm proposing.
alternative to the over-serving language that's currently in the proposed statute.
May I
Or
ask,
ordinance, yeah.
Mayor, may I ask for a clarification? Is this intended to have criminal sanctions or civil sanctions?
My intent is to strike out completely your over-serving law and put in mandatory tips training.
Okay, and so if they fail to do that, what is the ramifications?
If they fail to do it, they're gonna have to have that, all the tips training in place within 90 days. If not, then I don't know. That's a good question.
So my reason I'm bringing it up is that, I would need direction before you ask whether I think that that's going to suffice. If it, is this, do I issue a citation to the owner? Hey, you've got an employee here that's not currently certified. They're on their 92nd day and they're serving. Does the server have a sanction? I'm just looking for clarification on that.
Then I guess my question would be, do we have the power sitting at this table to do something about that? If that were to happen, if you had that issue, you went to them and somebody was at 91 days and didn't have their tips training done, and then you go back a week from now or even just at 91 days, do we have the power to put some sort of a sanction against them?
Well, to answer your question, we could do what Sheridan did. They had it's almost like the demerit system, only it's fine-based, where there's a graduated fine system where each infraction is much more expensive than the one before.
Is that considered civil?
Straightforward.
But then there is a method where they can they can go back and say, okay, we made a mistake here, here's our plan to make sure this doesn't happen again. And the police department would have the authority, I guess Mr. Henry would have the authority to say, that's a good enough plan, we're gonna drop this. So there is some judgment involved that can, kind of get them out of the hot water if they're doing the right thing, right?
Well, I've made no secret about my concerns about the over-serving thing to start with, but having said all that, if you want to travel down this road, I wouldn't, I don't think that it would have to be an either-or kind of a thing. You could still say, thou shalt not over-serve, and I have to, I can't imagine that there's a server that couldn't tell if somebody is obviously intoxicated. The idea that would have to have some high level of training and everything, in my mind, is absurd. People reasonable people, unless you're blind and everything, you can tell if somebody is obviously intoxicated. So I think that's kind of a false issue in there. But as far and I can see, we sit here and we say, well, this council, past councils, other councils haven't taken administrative action against bad actors. Well, that's true. You know, I don't ever recall a bar in Casper in my whole life having their license revoked. I don't know if it's urban myth or not, but the $1 million.
I've done it.
Oh, okay.
I've been
well,
involved in a few.
But the $1 million bar in Cowboy in Jackson was named that because they got shut down one time, and they figured that was what they lost, was that much in gross in the period while their license was suspended. I think that councils have to be ready to step up to the plate and look at somebody and say, yeah, I don't care if you got $500,000 invested in this. You know, you didn't follow the rules, we're gonna go at you. But I think we do have an obligation as we draft this kind of legislation, that we draft something that's clear and that gives the enforcement mechanisms and powers to our city employees that we want them to have, so that 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down the line, it's clear that these are the things that you have to do. And so, you know, if you want to do this over-serving thing, you know, I don't think that the language that's in this current thing really could be improved on very much in terms of making it clear what people can and can't do. I like Councilman Friel's idea of making this, in essence, tips training mandatory. We can put some additional language onto that saying, and if a bar owner doesn't comply with this, this is what happens. The first offense is a $100 fine to the bar owner. The second offense is this, and the offending server doesn't get to work in that line of work in town. There are different things that we can do, and I would just say that this is, I don't view this and that proposal as an either or. You know, we could do both of them.
Were you waiting, Kristen? I agree with Steve. I do agree that there needs to be something that, I don't know necessarily believe it needs to hold the server to it, because if we're going to require the bar or the restaurant or whatever to make sure that the waitress or waiters or bartenders are going through this, then it is the owner's responsibility to make sure that they are, and if they're not, you know what, they get the fine. It's on them. They should be taking care of their employees in that aspect. Looking at this, I want to say the idea was to eliminate the intoxication of people driving or being out in public. And so I'm not sure, and somebody correct me because I don't know enough about the laws and alcohol. I don't drink, so I don't know a lot about it. I've stepped in 3 bars my entire life, and that was to be a designated driver. So I don't see why I can't say no person, whether a licensee, the licensee's employee, agent, or other person, something along through after the tips training, after this here, does not report intoxicated person leaving the establishment of wherever they're at and reporting it to the appropriate authorities. Maybe it's in a different one, but I don't see it on here. And if we're trying to eliminate those intoxicated people, then if they're going through the tips, as you said, they can obviously tell if somebody's intoxicated. They go out to walk out that door, then it should be on the servers to report it to the police immediately. And I haven't seen anything on here that says that a server should be reporting it. That is on them. If they see an intoxicated person walk out that door and possibly going to get in a car and they don't call it in, I'm sorry, that is on the server. Because they shouldn't be walking out intoxicated.
What if they have a designated driver?
Then they can say, here's my designated driver.
They're intoxicated. They don't know that they need to responsibly walk up to the server and let the server know their plans for the rest of the night and then be on their way.
When I've got in and I know people were drinking, we automatically establish I am the designated driver way beforehand.
Sean?
I just wanna say I could probably get behind Councilman Friel's plan more so than the other one.
How about this? I like Chris' idea of a resolution though, too. I mean, we could, I mean, and I do too. I think it's a good middle ground. But we could also say, this is a serious problem in our community, and we are going to, council is going to make this change to require that TIPS training be proven and done consistently. If we don't see good compliance with this, if we don't see some reductions in these numbers, we will reconsider an over-serving ordinance. To make it clear to the owners that if you don't want this to happen, comply with it. If you want to see an over-serving ordinance, play games with this and try to get out from under it.
If we went with Steve's amendments in whole, we'll be taking out the criminalization aspect of this, and we did a resolution. We have to monitor this, just like we were talking about on the animal ordinance. Is anything getting any better? And that means a consistent set of data that is useful and very objective. And now one of the things, the problems with any kind of arrest data is the chief can solve the DUI problem tomorrow. Change the name of it and arrest everybody for public intox. So it's the outcomes that you're looking for. What are the number of injury-related accidents, alcohol-related, those negative behaviors that you see because of intoxication instead of just the physical arrest or lack of physical arrest, because that can become pretty situational. So if we do that, we need to kind of give some ideas on how we want to monitor this. And if it does not create a safer environment, then revisit this issue. If we need to put sanctions on it, put criminal sanctions into it. And in the meantime, a month from now, police department comes and says, I got a problem blooming at this bar. What are you guys gonna do about it? Gives us objective facts and we take actions, because that is our responsibility.
And my reaction to your comment is, it's right in the report for 2018. It was a matter of public record that we had concerns about what's going on at the gas light. She focused attention on the gas light. And if you look at the report for 2018, the gas light looks better than pretty much every other place in town because of all of that help. And so we did see data already from that. So did you have something else, Bob? And then we got to move on to decide if we
Yeah,
want
I
to
hear
do
you.
it, Steve.
I hate to keep preaching to the choir here, but the training system does work. I've explained what happens in mining. The mining system works just fine, and you can get minor training probably 6 or 7 places here in Casper. And it's also an opportunity for our PD to have these guys make money off time by teaching TIPS training.
Carter?
Mr. Mayor,
I'm a certified trainer.
I can also testify to the benefit that mandatory training has with regard to changing a culture and paradigm in a community like this one. I do think that having the servers participate is incredibly important, but I also think the people who are manning the doors and having those interactions with the customers should also be included as well in that mandatory training. Bartenders as well. I think it all needs to be a part of it.
Well, in here, it has alcohol service staff, which to me would include everybody that
Could we put
deals with
that in
alcohol.
the?
I say, I think it's a
Could we
definition.
add that to the definitions, Mr. Henley? And do what Carter says, that would be a more generic, anybody who works there basically.
Or just say all employees.
All employees.
All y'all get some.
Okay, let's, I think we're getting somewhere here. Can we get a thumbs up on Steve's, revision here to require TIPS training? Is everybody?
Can I get clarification?
And that we would strike the over-serving section of the ordinance, is everybody? Okay. How do people feel about a resolution to kind of make a statement that if this doesn't work, we're gonna do something more draconian?
We can do that, that's pretty well implied.
Well,
Anything we
let's
can do
make it
beyond
crystal
that.
clear though.
But what's Chris gonna
And
say?
then we've given Mr. Henley some requests on the definitions of some of these terms, and so, Kristen?
With the resolution, I would just request that we are a little careful with our wording. If we put out a resolution that says something along the lines of, we have like this rampant problem of, it is going to be perceived, not only in Casper, but people far and wide. If I was looking at taking a job here and I was like, oh, I'll just Google it before I come here, and I type like Casper quality of living, and the first thing that comes up is a city council resolution that's like, we have a very serious problem in the city of Casper. I'm gonna be like, maybe I'll interview elsewhere. I think we just need to be a little careful with the light that we put it in and how it looks for Casper.
And I like the way Chief did his introduction, which is this about a safe community. We're trying to create safety in our community.
Does that mean not the draconian part then?
So, I'll leave that word out.
That's what I thought was cool.
Let's leave that out. I'm sorry, I gotta go. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, can I ask one more question?
No.
Or actually, two more things.
No.
Is there if in fact the numbers are that skewed, is there, I would ask that we look at some way of fixing that, so that whether it's going online instead of filling out a sheet or whatever it might be, and I know you don't have the answer to it, and that's something that you have to go to the WASCAP with, but I mean, obviously, if our numbers are that skewed between what's being reported in a report or a summary and what you actually have here, that's an issue if we're relying upon that.
Andrew, do you have any comment on how we can resolve those discrepancies, Chief?
Department information is for the state information.
Data collection is extremely important to us, and because we use it. As the chief of police, I'm committed to the analysis of the data, and so that we can work better, work easier. Not, we have specific goals in mind. So yes, some of the discrepancies come from, and this will be more familiar to some of you, is that oftentimes the officers are looking for the most efficient way to deal with the situation. So rather than making a physical arrest where we put them in the car and take them and book them into jail, where we fill out this form, the officers will issue a citation in lieu of arrest. Hasn't changed the fact that that was an alcohol-related event that circumvented the need. So it was a technical, legal arrest that we found another way to just not incarcerate them. We got them home safely. We met our goals. That occurs on a 12, going from memory, like 1,200 times in 2018. So there's a lot of permutations of why those numbers don't jive with the reality of Casper. Not the least of which is I can't vouch for, did every form get turned in? Did it get filled out every time? When they put them in a stack and they got picked up, did they get analyzed correctly? This is now a fourth-party vendor is providing this information that I had no control over to begin with. So I have to focus on the information available to me through my own records management system, which I believe to be much more accurate and a more complete picture of what's happening in the city of Casper. The package that was given to council's got some discrepancies in it because I have a new crime analysis person who's kind of working their way through it. For example, there's a red-colored spreadsheet in there on DUI arrests for 2018, and it shows 165. Well, there's two types of DUI, and we didn't run to produce the report for council. I'm admitting to you we didn't do both types, and so instead of the 332, it shows 165. One in fact, that's inaccurate information. The department is going to get better at providing council the information that you need to make decisions on how you resolve issues with liquor licenses and how you face public safety concerns within the community. We're committed to that. I ask, I humbly come before you and acknowledge we're learning as a department. I have a brand new person that's learning how to run these queries. I had to go back today on very short notice with about 50 minutes before meeting time and try to get legitimate information so that I could give you accurate information. So I'm not trying to make excuses, but there is a reality of we want to give you a better product. We'll get better at it.
Okay. Steve?
And the only other thing, I know we have a ton of boards and commissions that we're on, but with alcohol being such a big issue, why do we not have a council member who attends the Sumner County Alcohol Dealers Association or assigned to that, so that if, you know, these type of issues come up, at least you have a representative from the state being there. I don't know if that's correct in making that suggestion and putting somebody on there, but it might not be a bad idea either.
Sean?
I think one of the issues too is that the Natrona County Liquor Dealers Association is not the majority, doesn't even have a majority of liquor license owners on that board.
That's a good question. I mean, there are some fairly arbitrary decisions as far as the list of agencies and boards that they do sit on, and that's always open for discussion as to whether there should be another. We've got quite a few, so.
And it'd potentially benefit them. I
It
mean, if
would.
they knew they had a hearing city council at those meetings, they would probably see an increase in membership.
I mean, I'm okay with that, as we always need a volunteer to do that, so.
Ray?
How about this guy?
I was just gonna say, we left the guy that left early.
Yeah.
That's what you get.
It's gonna be a good time not to leave.
And
the
as
meeting.
we leave the subject, since we were the subject of an editorial on this, when we remove the over-serving section, we also remove the possibility of a homeowner being cited for over-serving. Okay, which I was in favor of. Okay, anything else on this? Good work, everybody. Sanitary sewer interceptor state revolving fund loan application.
Mr. Mayor, we're gonna make up some time on this, particularly if you like my idea, which I would highly encourage.
Well played.
We have a 9-mile sewer main, if you will, that collects a lot of sewage from around the community, mostly on the west side, that is in need of repair and replacement. It's about an $8 million project, and in fact, you've heard me mention this from time to time in various budget discussions that we had. The challenge is, this is a fiscal year 19 application implication, but a fiscal year 20 budgetary implication. We're just kind of at that overlap period of time here where they're not really going to tell us an answer until after the new fiscal year. So what we'd like to do is make application. We'd like to take advantage of a state program that allows us a 25% principal forgiveness on the cost of the project, which in this case, as you might imagine, is about a $2 million savings. And we think that if you're okay with it, we can cash flow the project in such a way that we won't actually incur any debt, because once we award the project and it's done and the project is complete, we would pay off the loan with the opportunity fund and keep 25% of the cost of the project if our application is successful. So an $8 million project becomes a $6 million project, and the opportunity fund has the dollars available to flow that cost.
Questions for Bob?
Yeah, I know we gotta do this. This was originally a 1% project to begin with, to put that line in, as I recall. And when we did that, it was not, I don't think it was 5 years before we discovered we had pretty serious problems with low flow rates that were causing the damage to the pipe. I think we need to do this. I think we ought to keep in mind that it was a 1-cent project to begin with. However, right now, we're about $3 million where we thought we would be, ahead of where we thought we would be, on total 1-cent collections, including both the state portion and the 1-cent 15 portion. What that boils down to is by the end of this fiscal year, we'll be, assuming things stay on a fairly even keel, we'll be at about 4.5 million. In addition, the unallocated 1% fund. My problem is taking opportunity funds and spending them on what was originally an infrastructure project. I don't mind loaning that money from the opportunity fund to get this project started and get the state grant going. Once we do that, make that a loan, and then when we have the year end done, I think we got pretty good chance of having 4 million and change. and then have this discussion again about taking $8 million out of an opportunity fund, or $6 million. I guess it's just a different way of looking at the financing, because we have known for years that we needed to do this. This is a 37-year-old line, roughly, and that really is about the life of the line. And I think we did put it in with 1 cent funding. Well, I'm not sure exactly that's true, but I think we did 1 cent fund it. But we can find that out. But it's an infrastructure thing. But to take opportunity funds and commit those, and then perhaps lose out on some other opportunities because that money is gone. So I'm just suggesting that we consider it a loan and then reevaluate the situation at the end of this calendar year and see if we might be able to take some money from unanticipated 1 cent revenues.
Reactions to Bob's suggestion?
I like Bob's suggestion.
I like it.
Carter, you okay with that?
Actually, I'm glad Councilman Hopkins mentioned that, Mr. Mayor. We are working on a policy proposal that would indicate any surplus 1 cent funds would be allocated to opportunity fund for future direction and consideration. So I think if we treat it that way, it should meet with what you have in mind and,
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
and be able to.
I just don't want to spend that opportunity fund when this is
goes away.
part and parcel of our infrastructure for Casper, infrastructure.
Absolutely.
It's possible someday that opportunity fund will be relabeled police station fund.
That's out there.
Well, the police station is the opportunity.
Any other comments on this? Are we good with going forward with that?
I'm ready for number
Thank
7.
you. Thank you very much.
Okay, agenda setting. So let's get out, just trying to get this new drill in place here. So this is the piece of paper we're looking at, because we have essentially a blank agenda for 4 weeks from today. And before we look at this list, does anyone have anything they would like to add to the list that they don't see on here now? That's how we'll start this each time. I got about 20. I'm not gonna go through them all tonight, but any work session topics that people want to propose?
Mr. Mayor? I certainly would like to come forward to the council at some point here to talk about finance policies.
Okay.
In that, I think they could use some work.
Okay. Okay?
So it probably end up on the
Just-
staff suggested. Yeah.
On the staff suggestion, it's okay?
Right.
All right. None of the ones I want to add are urgent, and so I guess we could kind of work from this list now and work our way through them, and I can suggest my topics at a later time. What would people like to focus on in 4 weeks that's on this proposed work session agenda item list?
I will say that February 26th is a 4-hour meeting. So maybe we could move something. That's a long meeting. I mean, if we want to do it, then that's fine, but.
No, I don't want to do a 4-hour meeting.
So if we could move 1 or 2 of these topics to, that's people.
You're talking
you're
about
on
2
it.
weeks from today.
Right, the one that's already set, is that is a 4-hour meeting, February 26th. So
I was-
I'm
yeah,
saying
okay.
that if we wanted to, if there's things that aren't super pressing, that we could move 2 of these or 3 of these things into the following work session, March 12th.
From the 26th to the 12th.
Yes.
Because we did already put one thing on the 12th. What is the NAPA IBS update on the 12th?
Mr. Mayor, a number of months ago, we implemented the Napa IBS program, which is a parts management program, and we just wanted to give you data to make sure we're doing what we said it would do.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, if I can jump in, and I don't mean to underscore the work that people are doing, but I can read what the NIPA program, unless there's a change that needs to be put in there. I don't, speaking for myself, I don't need a presentation on it. A lot
I
of
can
those
live with that
updates.
unless there's recommendations you think need to be modified or go away from it.
Mr. Mayor, the only reason we suggested it initially is because we had taken some questions and complaints from other vendors, and we want to give you the opportunity to vet those. But if that's not a concern, that's huge for us, and we'll put it in paper.
You could just
Absolutely.
incorporate that into your end of the meeting report too.
You
as
betcha.
well, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just briefly, okay.
Absolutely.
So
You
Sean's
bet.
suggesting we pull a couple things off of the 26th and move them over to the 12th. Any comments on that or suggestions, Chris?
I think that health plan and wages coincide with each other being budgetary issues. I'm just certain the health plan is gonna be a budgetary issue thing. So maybe that would be, if those two were put on that, then we're done with that day.
We are. Because it's 80 minutes. Comments?
You're saying leave those two on that date, move the rest?
No, I'm saying take those two
Move
off
those
and
two.
put them on the next one, unless that causes a jam, Carter, for any kind of budget preparation or anything like that.
The only concern I would have is if you have follow-up reporting needed or whatever, given that those topics are fairly complex. It might put us up against a bit of a crunch, but we'll certainly do what you like.
I'm not invested in which ones are staying, just separate them, but I would like those two to be together. So if we wanna
That would
Yeah.
help. That
leave
would
them
help.
like Steve said and shift the others over, then
Municipal court revisions could be done at any time, right?
They
John?
could, yeah, they are, in my opinion, and Councilman Huber's opinion, there are some pressing issues, but they're not, I don't think putting them off another 2 weeks is gonna hurt anything.
And I don't
unless-
think that's gonna take really very long. But I do think there are some things that probably should be coming to the council's attention pretty soon.
You think the 12th of March would be too late for that, or you think that's?
Well, I'd just soon bring it up a little bit earlier rather than later, but whatever works best for scheduling.
I do agree with Sean, it's a long meeting on the 26th if we don't move something. And planes, I assume we need to get rolling on.
And when do we go on overtime?
well, I mean, as far as council emergencies, that's a tornado or a flood. None of these are. So we keep that in perspective. We can.
Just don't want to make these guys' job more difficult if we put them in a bad spot.
And honestly,
You do too. You tried to do a traffic study on 2 blocks last week.
Mr. Mayor?
I'm a witness.
How is that 40 minutes for the municipal court, how's that number arrived at? Because that seems way long to me. You know,
Well, that meeting that we were in with her was an hour and a half.
yeah. Well, I was thinking more in terms of about a 15-minute sort of a thing.
Presentation.
Did you talk?
We've been talking about this for more than 15 minutes.
Good point. Okay, let's make a decision. What are we gonna move to the 12th? Can we do the wages and health plan together on the 12th? I think?
Absolutely.
And that doesn't, all right, and then I think Chris is right, that fills up the 12th. And then when we meet on the 26th, we will plan March 26th using this list. And so this is also time to, again, remember that if there's something else you want on that list, we'll have a chance to do that in 2 weeks.
Mr. Mayor, can I?
go ahead, sir.
So this is also things that we can talk about where we don't need to talk about them. So my suggestion would be take parking on parkways off the list.
Things are on the list if a majority of council
That is
agrees
true.
to talk about it.
That is true.
But
So if
that
we-
was on the list before we
Right.
made that rule. And I think we could ask the majority of council, and it might be, don't think we need to talk about it.
To just remove it. Well, I think the reason it's on there is,
One
it
complaint.
continues to be one person.
That's what brought it forward, was one person.
Well,
Sorry, can you just
I've heard
put
from
once
other
per
people
place?
too, that they've been told.
That, the grassy area between the sidewalk
They've
and the
been,
street.
there are
Oh,
people
okay,
that treat
thank you.
that as it's their property
Uh-huh.
and
I
try to
gotcha.
tell other
Okay.
people they can't be there. And we have a current ordinance on the books that we're not enforcing, is that right, Mr. Henley?
That is correct.
And so that's not a good situation.
Can I postpone it to a date certain? And can it sound something like when hell freezes over?
let's just defer that to the time.
All right.
Okay, so then but we also want to make sure Carter gets a chance to tell us about anything on the 19th that we need to know about ahead of time, because that agenda is also in front of us. And then we can move on,
the regular
so.
council
Yeah, the regular council meeting on the 19th, is there anything we need to discuss about that's on this agenda?
Annual renewal of liquor licenses.
That's a big one. Yeah, that's a big one. And I'll tell you, just as a quick note, some of the liquor dealers that I've been visiting with have actually suggested that we make that a mandatory appearance from those that hold licenses. Something to think about. I don't need direction on that tonight, but
I think in all fairness, though, they need plenty of notice.
oh, absolutely. I'm not suggesting that for next week,
Yeah.
but just an idea. Yeah.
A work session topic.
You bet.
Does anybody have any questions on the agenda for the 19th? Most of these are consent items.
The recycling one is part of the overall project on the dump, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Steve.
Just a question, as far as the renewal of liquor license goes, will there be information, I think it's Taylor, what's,
On whether or not he opened that place up with
whether-
commissary?
yeah, how that's been, if
I
it's
saw
being
that they look
operated,
open.
if.
Did it?
We can answer that right now if you'd like.
Please.
You want to address it?
Your Honor, we have been checking and it is operational. We've had some issues with their business hours, but we've gone by and they are open for business, so we're working that.
At the commissary mall, right?
Yes, it's called Cocktails. It's not labeled. They don't have a sign or anything. They just have a little sign stating the hours and there's somebody in there. But we were able to go and post notice for the liquor license.
Is it just a package store?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. It's just a placeholder deal for him until he figures out what he wants to do with it, right?
That is correct.
Yes.
It's been a few years.
Literally, yeah.
Thinking back on those proposals we got, we had the license. Okay. Anything else on the agenda for the 19th then? Are we good? Okay, so go around the table.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry, can I bring
Oh,
up
no,
one thing on
legislative.
agenda review, if I could, real quick?
Okay.
As a follow-up to a request of the council,
Yes.
we did put together a questionnaire document that we are hopeful will help you put together some thoughts that we could use for the council goals discussion on the 25th. You will note, however, with the packet that we presented you tonight, we do have some resource material. The electronic version that you are getting via email will have the unabridged version of the resource material. Here you just have summary kinds of sheets attached. Look for your email and you'll have the full master plan, for example, for the community that I would suggest reading through in preparation for this meeting. You'll also have the full Endow report, which I think too is a very good resource for a discussion of this nature. And so we tried to follow your guidance with regard to the questionnaire and hopefully provide material as well that will be helpful to the conversation. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Legislative review, I think we all got the email on the VA facility that went south on us again.
Yeah.
Anything else we need to know about what's going on at the legislative level?
We're winding down and the bills are getting tossed right and left and it's about out of the discussion.
We do have one other that people should know about if you haven't read about this already. It's called House Bill 291, and it's another challenge to home rule. It's apparently they got in another little battle out in Teton County about a brew pub that was in a zoned industrial area, and they were trying to turn it into a serving area, but they didn't have the same parking restrictions or requirements that they would have had if they were in a commercial area. And so the council said, you're not zoned for what you want to do, if I'm saying this correctly. And so the legislature is considering a law that basically would remove that authority from us to enforce our zoning standards once a liquor license is granted. Did I say that correctly?
I think that's about it, yeah.
So,
That's about right.
Thank you very much. We should be
Need to
able to
build a
run
wall
our own
around
affairs. So,
Need to build a wall around Jackson now.
so Cheyenne is very opposed to this, and Wham is moving their position, I'm pretty sure, from monitor to oppose. So we'll see what happens with that. Okay, around the table. Bob, why don't you start us?
I'll make it easy. I think I'm done.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ray?
Nothing.
Mike? Steve?
The only thing I would bring up is, maybe this is for the chief. We had some discussions with a lot of the liquor dealers here in town. They keep mentioning the Wyoming Cocktail Society. It's like an underground bottle club, and I don't know. I just thought I would bring that up, that's obviously getting a lot of attention from the liquor dealers.
It is. I don't know what do you want the
Might
chief
be
to
ongoing
comment?
and probably better for a different discussion.
Yeah. I think that's right. Okay.
Fair way to put it, yeah.
Okay. Sean, you got anything?
Just
Or do you have anything else, Steve?
No. We have a council finance committee meeting on Tuesday, right before the council meeting.
And I'll just mention that I did contact this information matrix group that's putting these little videos showcasing communities on PBS. And I've talked with Brooke Kaufman about this. There is a fee associated with this, but it still looks like it's worth something worth pursuing because it has a nationwide distribution network, and it would be an opportunity for people, basically for our community to get some exposure. So we're just gonna look into it. So, Kristen?
I would just say there's a lot of good publicity on Facebook this weekend. From the Monster Truck Show, there were a lot of people that were like raving about the seats. There were a lot of people, not a lot, but a handful of people who had like either messaged the event center somehow and got like immediate responses like about concerns. And so there was a lot of raving about how well the event went and how like happy people were with their response time on issues.
Oh, good. Okay, nice to hear that.
Are we gonna submit our priorities for the goal setting work session prior to?
How would you like to
What
do
we
that?
want to
See, I would think if we all took the time to work to fill it out, that we could just kind of read from our information and put something together, unless you want to submit it and compile it. ahead
Either
of
way
time.
is fine for me. This won't comprise my goals, but, this format's useful in some areas, but it's not how mine's gonna be dictated, but
Okay.
we can all do it. I was just thinking if we had collective ones, automatically those would go into a pile somewhere, but we can't do that among each other. We'd have to send that to someone in the staff to.
Transcribe them and what's everybody's pleasure?
Good either way.
Well, we were gonna have this in a Word format that we can actually type in there, right? So,
So they're gonna email this out? Okay, so
Well,
why don't we just fill it out and email it back this time?
Is that okay with everybody?
Sure.
Okay. By when?
When are we on the 25th is when our.
25th.
Today's the 12th.
so you wanna just bring it typed, or you wanna send it back to Fleur?
We'll send it
You know,
back.
how about if you send it in, that'll put us that much ahead, and if somebody doesn't, it's no big deal. I mean, whenever we set a deadline and we don't hit it, then we start getting people concerned at the city, like, come on, you gotta get this in, you gotta get this in. Well, we're all grown. If we didn't wanna turn it in, don't make them jump through hoops. So it'll help if we send it to them. If not, we'll wait till the day.
Would you, and if the format doesn't work, would you like another box, just other comments added, so you could put something else in there?
You can attach
It's a
your own
Word
file.
document. It's a Word document. I just-
So
We can
it'll
do
still work, even though it's got different.
Oh, yeah, it's just the topics here.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
There's 2 pages to that questionnaire too, though, and one of them talks about what are your top 3 priorities and so forth, so those are meant to be kind of wide open with regard to whatever it is you might want to have considered.
Okay. I'll just get them back to floor.
Nice work.
Okay, anything else? I guess we're done.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
15 minutes early, right?
Is that right?
Hey, I don't know.
Really?
5 minutes early, maybe.
Still early. I think my pipeline discussion saved the day.
Nail it.